Isabella thought she had it all. A fairy tale marriage to a millionaire husband. But when his empire crumbled, she did the unthinkable. She sold everything she owned just to keep their home standing. What she never imagined was the betrayal waiting for her in the dark. The night she discovered her husband wasn't just broke. He was secretly with her maid of honor. What happened next will leave you speechless. Before I begin the story, I'd like to say a quick prayer for you, my dear family. May your days be filled with peace, your heart with joy, and your steps guided by light. Amen. If you're happy to be here, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. Lightning split the night sky above the Benjamin estate. A grand house whose marble pillars once symbolized triumph, but now stood like silent witnesses to secrets too heavy to confess. Rain poured in unrelenting sheets, drumming against the wide bay windows and seeping into the hollow silence of Isabella Benjamin's heart. Inside, the glow of a single lamp cast shadows across the living room, revealing half-packed boxes, receipts scattered like fallen leaves, and the absence of everything she had once called her own. Her mother's pearl necklace was gone. The mahogany armoire she had inherited from her grandmother had been sold at an auction house. Even the Steinway piano, the last relic of her father's memory, had been wheeled out of this house just a week ago. All of it, piece by piece, had been converted into money. And all that money, every last dollar, had gone to pay the mortgage of this mansion. The mortgage that bore the name of James Benjamin, her husband, her once prince, her once protector. Now a man drowning in debts he barely admitted to. Isabella sat in the corner of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside her. She tried to count the sacrifices, the things she had lost. But grief blurred them all together into one unbearable truth. She had given away everything that tethered her to her past, everything that might have secured her future. For love, for him, for James. The clock on the mantel struck 11. James had not returned home yet. His absence no longer surprised her. It had become a routine she hated to recognize. Her eyes wandered to the mortgage documents lying open on the table. Her signature, neat and deliberate, was stamped beneath James's hurried scrawl. She had signed them without hesitation, though her hands trembled that day. The bank had threatened foreclosure, and James, always proud, always insistent, had nearly broken down when he admitted it to her. "I'll find a way," he had promised. His voice had been raw, his hands clutching hers with such desperation that Isabella's heart had nearly shattered. "Just trust me, Bella. Just a little more time." A little more time had turned into months, and Isabella had sold everything that once belonged to her. Now there was nothing left to sell except herself. The storm deepened, and Isabella rose from her chair, pacing the length of the living room. The silence of the estate echoed too loudly against her thoughts. This house had once hosted soirees, its halls filled with music and laughter, with women draped in silk and men in tuxedos toasting James for his brilliance. But now the halls were empty. The laughter was gone, and James, her James, was slipping farther away with each passing day. She walked to the mirror above the fireplace and studied her reflection. Her once bright hazel eyes looked tired now, the fire in them dimmed by sleepless nights and unanswered questions. The storm of her hair framed a face that still bore beauty, but it was beauty weathered by sacrifice. When had she last seen herself smile? She could not remember. A sudden flash of memory struck her. Their wedding day. The church adorned with white roses, the echo of organ music, and James, impossibly handsome in his tailored black suit, looking at her as though she were the only woman in the world. Their friends had cheered, and their maid of honor, Elena, had stood beside her, whispering that she was the luckiest woman alive. The luckiest woman alive. Isabella's chest tightened as she replayed that phrase. Where had luck gone? Had it been buried with the fortunes James had lost in reckless business ventures? or stolen by the silent nights when he didn't return home. She sat again, this time at the desk in the corner. Papers cluttered its surface. Bank statements, overdue notices, desperate letters James had never shown her until creditors came knocking at the door. She shuffled through them, her fingers brushing over words that burned her eyes. Final notice. Overdue. Foreclosure proceedings. The house of glass they had built together was cracking, and yet she had been the one holding it together. Bleeding herself, dry to patch every fracture. A soft knock startled her. She rose quickly, her heart racing. But when she opened the door, it was only Martha, the aging housekeeper who had served the Benjamin family for decades. "You're still awake, Mrs. Benjamin?" Martha's voice carried the weight of years, both weary and gentle. "I couldn't sleep." Isabella forced a smile. "Neither could I. Storms like this make the bones ache." Martha glanced at the scattered papers and frowned. "You shouldn't trouble yourself with these things. Mr. Benjamin will." "Mr. Benjamin will what?" Isabella's voice cracked sharper than she intended. She lowered it quickly, guilt stinging her. "I'm sorry, Martha. It's just, I don't know how much longer I can carry this." The housekeeper placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, but even strength has limits. Don't let yourself break for someone who won't bend." Isabella blinked, startled by the quiet wisdom in Martha's words. She wanted to ask what Martha meant, but the woman gave her a small bow and retreated into the hall, leaving Isabella alone with her storm. Midnight came. James finally returned. The front door creaked open, and Isabella watched from the shadows as he stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat. His hair was disheveled, his eyes tired but distant, and there was an unfamiliar scent clinging to him. Not just bourbon, but perfume. "James." Isabella's voice was quiet, uncertain. He started slightly, then forced a smile. "Bella, you're awake. I've been waiting. I told you, the meetings run late. Investors are restless, and I have to." "Calm them," Isabella finished for him. She had heard this excuse too many times. He loosened his tie and walked past her, dropping into the armchair with a sigh. His posture carried the weight of defeat, but his eyes avoided hers. "I sold the last of my jewelry," she said suddenly. James's head snapped toward her, his expression unreadable. "You what?" "I had to. The bank wouldn't wait any longer. It was either that or lose the house." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the storm outside. James's jaw tightened, and something flickered in his eyes, shame, perhaps, or resentment. "He shouldn't have done that," he muttered finally. "What choice did I have?" Isabella demanded, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Everything we own is slipping away, James. I've given up everything. My mother's necklace, my father's piano, everything. And I did it all for you. For us." James stood, his hands clenching into fists. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't feel the weight of this every second of every day? Then why do I feel like I'm fighting this battle alone?" Isabella whispered. He turned away, staring at the rain-lashed windows. His silence was an answer she had dreaded but never wanted confirmed. And in that silence, Isabella realized something was wrong. Something deeper than debts, deeper than pride. Something James wasn't telling her. The storm outside raged on, but the storm within Isabella Benjamin had only just begun. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Benjamin estate, pale and muted after the storm. The house smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth, but the silence within was heavy, almost suffocating. Isabella stirred awake in the grand four-poster bed, reaching instinctively for James's side. Cold sheets met her fingertips. He was already gone. It had become a pattern she no longer questioned out loud. James slipping into the house past midnight, his excuses rehearsed and tired, then leaving before dawn under the guise of business. What business remained, Isabella wondered, when creditors circled like wolves and foreclosure loomed? She rose slowly, pulling her robe around her shoulders. The mirror across the room reflected her, still elegant, still graceful, but thinner now, both in body and spirit. Once she had been the envy of their circle. Isabella Benjamin, wife of the brilliant James Benjamin, the millionaire whose smile could charm investors and whose empire had seemed unshakable. But smiles and empires faded, and Isabella was left with debts and doubts. Downstairs, Martha was already at work in the kitchen. The sound of clattering pans and the aroma of brewing coffee offering a fragile sense of normalcy. "Good morning, Mrs. Benjamin." Martha greeted her softly, handing her a porcelain cup. Isabella managed a small smile. "Good morning. Has James eaten?" "No, ma'am. He left just before 6. Said he had early meetings downtown." Isabella's grip tightened on the cup. She nodded, though her chest ached with the familiar hollowness of his absence. She wanted to believe his words, but doubt had rooted itself too deeply. She carried her coffee into the sitting room, where newspapers lay stacked on the table. The bold headlines screamed of market crashes, bankruptcies, and ruined fortunes. Names she recognized, men and women who had once toasted champagne alongside her and James, were now reduced to cautionary tales in print. "Are we next?" she wondered, her heart tightening. By mid-afternoon, Isabella dressed and prepared to run errands. Even simple outings had become a battlefield. Where once shopkeepers greeted her with admiration, now they offered pity, or worse, whispers that followed her down aisles. The Benjamin fortune was not just dwindling, it was evaporating, and society loved nothing more than a fallen star. At the florist shop, Isabella lingered over white lilies, her mother's favorite. As she reached for a bouquet, a familiar voice called out, "Isabella, darling, it's been ages." She turned. Standing there, radiant in a fitted emerald dress, was Elena, her maid of honor, her friend of years past. Elena's beauty had always been striking, tall, with raven black hair that spilled down her back, and eyes that carried secrets behind every glance. "Elena," Isabella managed, masking her surprise with a smile. "It has been some time." Elena leaned in, her perfume strong, her embrace lingering. "I was just thinking of you the other day. We really mustn't lose touch. How have you been?" Isabella hesitated. How does one answer such a question when one's life is unraveling? "Managing," she said softly. Elena's eyes flickered with curiosity, or was it something else? "And James?" "Still busy conquering the world." The words cut, though Elena delivered them sweetly. Isabella forced a laugh. "He's busy, yes." They exchanged pleasantries, but beneath Elena's polished charm, Isabella sensed something sharp, something probing. As they parted, Elena touched her arm gently. "You know, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. We've been friends too long for you to carry everything alone." Isabella thanked her, though unease lingered. As she watched Elena leave, graceful and self-assured, Isabella felt the faintest ripple of dread. That evening, Isabella waited again for James. She had prepared dinner herself, a simple meal, but crafted with care. The candles burned low as the hours passed, and still he did not come. Finally, near 10, the front door opened. James entered, his tie loosened, his jacket slung carelessly over one arm. "You're late," Isabella said gently. "Meetings," he replied curtly, avoiding her eyes. "I made dinner. I've eaten." The words fell like stones between them. Isabella's chest tightened, but she steadied her voice. "James, we need to talk. About the mortgage. About us." He poured himself a drink instead, the amber liquid glowing in the glass. "There's nothing to discuss. I'm handling it." "Handling it?" Isabella rose, her voice trembling. "By leaving me in the dark? By letting me sell everything I own while you vanish into the night?" James slammed the glass down, his eyes flashing. "I didn't ask you to sell those things." "No," Isabella whispered, "you didn't. But you let me strip my life bare while you drown in secrets. Do you even see me anymore, James? For a moment his expression wavered, something vulnerable flickering across his face. But just as quickly, the mask returned. He turned away. I'm tired, Isabella. We'll talk another time. And with that, he left her standing alone in the candlelit room, her heart fracturing in silence. Later that night, unable to sleep, Isabella wandered the halls. Her footsteps echoed against marble floors that no longer felt like home. She paused at the study door, where James often secluded himself. The faint murmur of a voice reached her ears, low, intimate, too soft to be a business call. She leaned closer. James's voice, warm and unguarded, carried through the wood. And then laughter. A woman's laughter. Familiar. Elena. Isabella's blood ran cold. She pressed her hand against the door, her pulse pounding in her ears. Every sacrifice, every late night, every desperate act to save James and their marriage collided with the sound of Elena's laugh. And in that moment, Isabella understood. The storm had only just begun, and she was standing at its eye. The morning after, Isabella awoke with a heaviness in her chest that no amount of sunlight could lift. The memory of Elena's laughter behind James's study door gnawed at her mind. It might have been innocent, she told herself. Old friends catching up, perhaps. Yet the sound had carried an intimacy, a warmth, that James no longer offered her. At breakfast, the tension between them was thick. James sat across the table, reading the financial section of the newspaper as though the world beyond his investments and losses held no weight. He barely acknowledged her. James, Isabella said softly, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for courage. He hummed in response, eyes never leaving the paper. Were you speaking to Elena last night? The question hung in the air like smoke. James lowered the paper slowly, his brows knitting together. Elena? Yes, Isabella pressed. I heard her voice in your study. For a moment, his gaze flickered, and then he gave a short laugh. Bella, you must have misheard. Elena called to check in, that's all. Nothing more. Her throat tightened. He lied easily, too easily. I see, she murmured, though doubt carved itself deeper into her chest. James returned to his paper, dismissing the matter as though it were trivial. But Isabella knew better. The way his jaw had clenched, the brief hesitation in his voice. The truth was there, hidden beneath the facade. That afternoon, Isabella ventured into town. She needed air, space, a world beyond the suffocating walls of the estate. Yet even there, whispers followed her. At the dressmaker's, two women leaned close, their voices carrying just enough for Isabella to hear. Such a shame, to think they had it all. I heard James Benjamin's fortunes are gone. She must be selling everything to keep afloat. Isabella's cheeks burned. She kept her head high, but inside, shame twisted like a knife. Later, at the grocer's, another whisper. Have you seen Elena lately? Always around the Benjamins. Some women just can't resist circling the wounded. The words struck harder than she wished to admit. Was Elena circling, or had she already sunk her claws into what Isabella held most dear? By the time she returned home, Isabella's mind was a storm. Evening came. James returned late again, his tie askew, his eyes bloodshot. Another meeting? Isabella asked quietly. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. Don't start, Bella. I'm exhausted. I'm not starting, she replied, her voice trembling. I'm trying to understand. James exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. For a fleeting second, he looked less like the proud businessman and more like a man unraveling. Everything I've built is slipping through my fingers, he said, his tone raw. Do you know what that feels like? To watch men who once shook your hand with respect now look at you like a failure. Isabella's heart ached. She wanted to reach for him, to remind him that he was not alone. But before she could, he turned away, pouring himself another drink. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered. The words cut. She had given everything for him, and still he shut her out. Days bled into weeks. The estate grew emptier with each passing day, stripped of treasures, sold to cover debts. Isabella walked through hollow rooms, the echoes of laughter from years past mocking her. Elena began to appear more frequently. Sometimes she arrived under the guise of visiting Isabella, bringing flowers or pastries, her smile dazzling. Other times, Isabella noticed her slipping into hushed conversations with James, their words too low to catch, but their glances sharp, charged. One afternoon, Isabella entered the sitting room to find Elena perched elegantly on the sofa, laughing softly at something James had said. The sight froze her in place. "Oh, Isabella," Elena exclaimed brightly, rising to embrace her. "I was just keeping James company while he waited for a call. You don't mind, do you?" Her words dripped with innocence, but her eyes lingered on James with something unspoken. "Of course not," Isabella replied smoothly, though her pulse thundered in her ears. James avoided her gaze. That night, when they were alone, Isabella tried again. "James, why is Elena here so often?" "She's an old friend," he answered curtly. "She cares about us." "About us," Isabella repeated bitterly. "Or about you?" He glared at her, anger flashing. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," she whispered. "I'm asking you to see me, to remember that I'm the one who's been by your side, selling pieces of my life to save yours." But James only shook his head, retreating into silence once more. One evening, Isabella found herself in the library, the only room still untouched by creditors. She trailed her fingers over the spines of books, searching for solace in words that had outlasted centuries. Her eyes landed on a volume of poetry, one James had once read aloud to her on their honeymoon. She opened it, and a slip of paper fluttered out. It was not a poem. It was a note, scrawled in a familiar hand. Asterisk tonight. The usual place, asterisk. Isabella's breath caught. The handwriting was James's. The words were brief, but damning. Her heart raced as possibilities tumbled through her mind. Who was he meeting? Where? And why in secret? Clutching the note, Isabella sank into a chair, her world tilting. The sacrifices she had made, the love she had given, the faith she had clung to, all of it teetered on the edge of collapse. The storm she feared was no longer approaching. It was already here. The slip of paper weighed heavier than gold in Isabella's hand. Asterisk tonight. The usual place, asterisk. The words replayed in her mind endlessly, each repetition digging deeper into her chest. She placed the note back in the book where she had found it, though her fingers trembled. At dinner, James was quiet, his answers clipped. His plate remained half full, his thoughts elsewhere. Isabella studied him carefully, every twitch of his jaw, every glance at the clock. "Will you be out again tonight?" she asked lightly, though her voice strained beneath the weight of her suspicion. If James would not give her the truth, she would find it herself. When he left the house that evening, Isabella waited 10 minutes before rising from her seat. She slipped into her coat, heart pounding, and summoned Martha. "Tell me when I've gone," Isabella instructed gently. Martha looked concerned, but nodded. "Be careful, ma'am." Isabella stepped into the night. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth from recent rain. She climbed into the car, the chauffeur ready, as always. "Follow Mr. Benjamin," she said quietly. The chauffeur hesitated only briefly before nodding. The car eased into the street, headlights dimmed. James's black sedan wove through the city streets, finally stopping outside a dimly lit restaurant tucked between shuttered shops. Isabella's chest tightened. This was not a boardroom, not a hotel conference center. This was something intimate. She leaned forward in the car, eyes fixed on the restaurant's entrance. Minutes passed, each one stretching like an eternity. Then the door swung open. James stepped out, and beside him Elena. Isabella's breath caught. They moved with a familiarity that betrayed them, not hand in hand, but close enough that their bodies seemed attuned to one another. Elena laughed at something James said, her hand brushing his arm. He didn't pull away. Isabella gripped the edge of the seat, nails biting into the fabric. "Drive closer," she whispered. The car crept forward until she could see their faces clearly beneath the glow of the streetlight. Elena's smile was radiant, almost victorious. James looked lighter than he had in months, his burdens melting in Elena's presence in a way Isabella hadn't seen in years. The sight shattered her. She wanted to burst from the car, to scream, to demand answers. But instead, she forced herself still. She needed more than suspicion. She needed truth, undeniable and cold. "Take us home," she whispered, her voice breaking. Sleep eluded her that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows forming cruel shapes in the dark. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Elena's hand on James's arm, heard his laughter mingling with hers. By dawn, her decision was clear. If James thought she would remain blind, he was wrong. She would uncover everything, and she would not confront him until she held proof that could not be denied. The following days became a quiet war. Isabella played her part flawlessly, the dutiful wife, polite, composed. But beneath the surface, she was watchful. Every time James left the house, she noted the time. Every unexplained absence was recorded in her mind like evidence in a trial. She began to search his study when he was away. At first, her hands shook with guilt, but soon her desperation overpowered her hesitation. She found ledgers filled with numbers she couldn't decipher, letters half burned in the fireplace, and receipts from restaurants she had never visited with him. And then, tucked inside his desk drawer, another note. Asterisk, tomorrow, 8 p.m. same place, asterisk. Her heart hammered. Elena's name was not written, but it didn't need to be. She knew. That evening, Isabella sat in the library with the note before her. Martha entered quietly, setting down a tray of tea. "Ma'am," Martha said gently, "you've not eaten all day?" Isabella forced a smile. "I'm not hungry." Martha hesitated, then placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder. "I know it isn't my place, but you deserve honesty, Mrs. Benjamin. Whatever he's hiding, you have a right to know." Isabella's eyes burned. "And what if the truth destroys me?" Martha's voice was steady. "Then, at least it will not destroy you in silence." The words sank deep. Silence had been her prison for too long. The following night, Isabella dressed with deliberate care, not in the finery she once wore to galas, but in a simple, elegant dress that carried quiet dignity. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, concealing herself in its folds. When James left, she followed again. This time, she did not remain in the car. She entered the restaurant, slipping into the shadows near the back. Her heart pounded, each beat threatening to give her away. And there they were, James and Elena, seated in a corner booth, heads bowed, close together. Their conversation was too low to hear, but their body language spoke volumes. Elena reached across the table, her hand covering his. James didn't pull away. Tears blurred Isabella's vision. Her chest constricted until she could barely breathe. But she stayed. She needed to witness every second, every betrayal etched into their faces. When Elena leaned in, whispering something that made James smile, a smile Isabella hadn't seen directed at her in years, the world around her crumbled. Still, she made no sound. She turned, her step steady, though her soul trembled, and slipped out into the night. Back at the estate, Isabella stood before the mirror in her room. The woman staring back at her was pale, hollow-eyed, yet unbroken. "You will not destroy me," she whispered to her reflection, though she wasn't sure if she spoke to James, to Elena, or to herself. For years, she had sacrificed everything for him. Now, as cracks widened into chasms, Isabella vowed that she would not be the casualty of James Benjamin's downfall. The storm was here, but she would not be swept away. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Benjamin estate, casting a deceptive warmth across the breakfast table. James sat at the head, scrolling through the day's financial reports on his tablet. His face was impassive, calm, the face of a man with nothing to hide. Isabella sat across from him, her teacup untouched. She studied him in silence, the rhythmic clink of his spoon against the porcelain bowl amplifying the chaos in her chest. "How was your meeting last night?" she asked softly, her tone deliberately casual. James didn't look up. As expected, lengthy. "We're negotiating another deal. Very complicated." She forced a smile. "I see." But inside, her heart raged. The lies dripped from his lips with the ease of water from a fountain. How many times had she believed him without question? How many nights had she prayed for his success, while he was offering his laughter, his warmth, to another? Her hands curled into fists beneath the table, hidden by the white linen cloth. She wanted to hurl her teacup across the room, to shatter the calm facade he wore so smugly. But instead, she lifted her spoon and stirred her tea with deliberate grace. If he could wear a mask, so could she. Later that day, Isabella stood in a study, the room heavy with the scent of leather and oak. She opened the drawer once more, retrieving the scraps of paper that had become her lifeline to the truth. Each note bore the same flowing script, the same promises of secret meetings. She spread them across the desk, arranging them in order, tracing the dates. A pattern emerged. The deception was not occasional, not fleeting. It was deliberate, sustained, practiced. Her heart ached, but her mind grew sharper. Pulling out her phone, she snapped photographs of the notes. Then she searched the desk further, uncovering receipts tucked into envelopes. Dinner for two, hotel reservations, even a jewelry purchase, a delicate necklace she had never seen. Her lips trembled as she read the receipt. He had bought Elena what he had denied her, not out of lack of money, but out of lack of love. The truth was poison, but Isabella swallowed it whole. That evening, Martha entered the room quietly. She stopped short when she saw the papers scattered across the desk. "Oh, Mrs. Benjamin." Isabella raised her eyes, glistening with tears, yet fierce with resolve. "I have the proof, Martha. Every lie, every secret. He's given me no choice but to see the truth." Martha hesitated, then whispered, "What will you do?" Isabella pressed her lips together, her gaze falling back to the damning papers. "I don't know yet, but I will not be silent. Not anymore." James returned late that night. Isabella lay awake, feigning sleep as the door creaked open. She heard the soft thud of his shoes hitting the floor, the rustle of fabric as he slipped into bed beside her. His scent carried traces of expensive cologne and something floral that wasn't hers. Her stomach churned, but she remained still, her breaths even. James placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of routine rather than affection, before turning away. Within minutes, his breaths deepened into sleep. Isabella stared into the darkness, wide-eyed. His nearness felt like betrayal in flesh and bone. She whispered into the silence, unheard by the man who once vowed forever. "You have already left me, James. You just don't know I see it." The following days stretched like taut strings, ready to snap. Isabella moved through the estate with quiet purpose. To the staff, she was composed, elegant, unchanged. But inside, she was sharpening her will. She began documenting everything: the receipts, the notes, the unexplained absences. Each piece she collected was another stone in the foundation of her awakening. One afternoon, she visited the bank. The manager greeted her with the deference owed to the wife of James Benjamin. "I'd like to review the mortgage payments," Isabella said calmly. The man frowned, flipping through files. "Of course. Mrs. Benjamin, you've been remarkably consistent with the payments. On time every month, no defaults." Isabella nodded, her heart twisting. She had sold her jewelry, emptied her inheritance, sacrificed everything to preserve their home. And all the while, James had squandered not just their fortune, but her trust. As she signed the necessary paperwork, a thought bloomed unbidden in her mind. Asterisk, this house stands because of me, not him. Me asterisk. For the first time in months, she felt the faint stirrings of pride. That night, James returned earlier than usual. He entered the sitting room where Isabella was curled with a book. "You're up late," he remarked. She looked up, her expression serene. "I couldn't sleep." James studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Don't tire yourself. Tomorrow will be busy." Isabella tilted her head. "For you, perhaps." There was a sharpness in her voice that made him glance at her, but she lowered her gaze before he could question it. When he left the room, Isabella exhaled. She had slipped, but it no longer frightened her. Let him begin to sense the storm gathering. Days passed. Isabella continued to shadow James's life from the periphery, never revealing her knowledge. She collected more evidence, more silent confessions written in ink and receipts. But as the weight of betrayal grew, so too did something else, a quiet strength. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror again. Her reflection no longer looked broken, no longer hollow. There was fire in her eyes, a flame rekindled by suffering. She whispered to her reflection, her voice steady this time, "You thought you could ruin me, James, but I will rise." Her words hung in the air, a promise to herself. For the first time, Isabella no longer felt like a victim. She felt like a woman awakening. And though the full storm had yet to break, she was ready to face it. The night hummed with quiet expectancy, as though the air itself knew what was about to unfold. Isabella sat in her room, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, listening to the muffled sounds of the estate settling into silence. James had left hours ago, claiming another business dinner. Her fingers traced the edges of the notes and receipts she had collected. They lay before her like a map of heartbreak, leading her step by step toward a destination she had never asked to reach. She closed her eyes. Asterisk tonight. I will know the truth with my own eyes. No more shadows. No more pretending. Asterisk. She instructed the chauffeur to follow James again. Her voice, steady though her chest trembled. The city rolled past in streaks of gold and shadow until his car finally slowed near an exclusive hotel. Isabella's breath caught. A hotel. "Wait here," she whispered, stepping out of her car. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she followed James at a distance, her shawl pulled high around her face. James strode into the hotel lobby with practiced ease. Moments later, Elena appeared, her gown clinging to her like liquid silk. She greeted him with a smile that glowed even brighter than the chandelier above them. James's hand brushed against hers, then lingered, guiding her toward the elevator. Isabella froze. The sight pierced her like a blade. Every prayer she had whispered, every sacrifice she had made, every piece of herself she had given, reduced to this. A husband, a stranger, walking into a hotel with the maid of honor she had once trusted. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself forward, slipping into the lobby just before the doors closed behind them. The elevator ascended slowly, its polished brass doors reflecting the distorted images of James and Elena standing too close, whispering too softly. Isabella stood across the lobby, her body trembling as though it were her world, not the elevator, rising. Minutes later, the doors opened again. James and Elena stepped out on the 10th floor. Isabella's heart pounded so violently she feared it might betray her presence. She waited a moment before following, her steps soundless against the plush-carpeted hallway. And then she saw it. Room 1007. James's hand slid across Elena's back as he opened the door. Elena's laughter floated into the hallway, light and cruel in Isabella's ears. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed was unbearable. Isabella stood rooted, staring at the brass numbers on the door, her breath ragged. Her soul screamed, but her lips remained pressed tightly shut. In that instant, everything she had feared became undeniable. She didn't remember how she returned to the car. She only recalled the driver's worried eyes in the rearview mirror and the way her hands shook as she whispered, "Take me home." Back at the estate, Isabella walked through the grand halls that suddenly felt hollow. Her footsteps echoed like accusations. She entered her room, shutting the door with deliberate care, then collapsed against it, her strength giving way. The sobs tore from her like a dam breaking. She wept for the years she had given, for the dreams she had built, for the love she had believed was unshakable. She wept until there were no tears left, only silence, a silence sharper than any scream. When dawn broke, Isabella was still awake, her eyes swollen but her spirit unbroken. She sat at her writing desk, the first rays of light illuminating the papers spread before her, proof of James's betrayal. Her hand moved slowly across a blank sheet, her pen trembling but determined. Asterisk James, I saw you last night. The lies can end now. You do not need to confess. Your actions spoke clearly. I gave you everything, my trust, my sacrifice, my devotion, and you repaid me with deceit. I do not yet know what path I will take, but know this. I will not be your silent victim. Not anymore, asterisk. She set the pen down, staring at the words. It was not a letter to be sent. Not yet. It was a vow, written in ink, carved into her own resolve. Later that morning, Martha entered with a tray of breakfast. She froze at the sight of Isabella's pale face and red-rimmed eyes. He was with her, Isabella whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. Martha's expression darkened. The maid of honor? Yes. Isabella's lips trembled, but her eyes shone with something fiercer than grief. It was her, and it was real. Martha set the tray down and knelt beside her. Then you must protect yourself, Mrs. Benjamin. You have given enough. Now you must think of you. Isabella nodded slowly. The fire that had sparked within her was no longer just embers. It was beginning to burn. That evening, James returned, his face weary but composed. He kissed Isabella's cheek absently, as though nothing were amiss. Long night, he murmured, loosening his tie. Isabella studied him silently, her heart oddly calm. She had seen him with her own eyes, and yet here he was, weaving lies with the ease of a man who believed himself untouchable. Did the meeting go well? She asked softly. He nodded, promising yes. She smiled faintly, her voice low but steady. Good. I'm glad. Inside, she thought, asterisk lie me again, James. Lie. While I gather the strength to destroy the silence you've built around me, asterisk. That night, as James slept peacefully beside her, Isabella lay awake, staring into the darkness. The truth had shattered her, but within the broken pieces, she felt something unexpected. Freedom. For the first time in years, she no longer feared losing James. She had already lost him. What remained was the question. What would she do with the pieces of herself he had left behind? Her lips curved into the faintest smile. The answer, she knew, would change everything. The days that followed were a performance, and Isabella played her role with flawless precision. At the breakfast table, she smiled faintly as James discussed business deals. At dinners, she laughed softly at his hollow jokes. To anyone watching, she was the perfect wife, elegant, composed, loyal. But beneath the polished surface, Her mind was sharper than it had ever been. Every word James spoke, every lie he delivered, she stored away like a weapon. She no longer searched for the truth. She had seen it with her own eyes. Now, she was preparing for what came next. One evening, while James was working late, Isabella sat in the study surrounded by documents. Mortgage receipts, bank statements, jewelry appraisals. She had built a ledger of her sacrifices, a silent testament to the price she had paid for his survival. Her eyes lingered on a particular note, the necklace receipt. She whispered to herself, "He bought her jewels with the same money I bled for my inheritance." Her hands trembled, but not with weakness, with fury. She gathered the documents and locked them in a small chest, one James never bothered to open. The evidence was hers, hidden waiting. The following morning, Isabella visited the lawyer her late father had trusted. She entered his office quietly, her shawl drawn close around her shoulders, her face a mask of dignity. "Mrs. Benjamin," the lawyer said warmly, rising to greet her. "It's been a long time." "Yes," she replied softly, taking a seat. "I come not for pleasantries, but for preparation. I need to know my options." The lawyer's brows furrowed. "Options, ma'am? Should my husband's business ventures collapse? Should his debts swallow him whole? Should I, perhaps, decide to walk away?" The man regarded her carefully, then nodded. "I see." For an hour, they discussed rights, accounts, and the division of assets. Isabella asked her questions with measured calm, though her heart raced beneath her composure. When she left, she carried not only papers, but the knowledge that she was no longer trapped. At the estate, James returned late, the scent of expensive perfume clinging to his jacket. Isabella greeted him with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Did the meeting go well?" she asked sweetly. James kissed her cheek absently. "Yes, promising, always promising." She nodded. "I'm glad." Inside, she thought, "One day soon, your promises will choke you, James." That night, Isabella stood on the balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance like scattered stars. Martha joined her, carrying a shawl. "You're colder these days, Mrs. Benjamin," Martha murmured gently, draping the shawl over her shoulders. Isabella's lips curved faintly. "Not cold, Martha. Strong." Martha's eyes searched hers. "You're planning something." Isabella turned her gaze back to the city. "Yes, but not revenge. Not yet. For now I prepare. He still believes I am blind. Let him. The longer he believes, the sharper my blade becomes." The next days revealed James's unraveling. He grew careless, his lies thinner. He would return home with lipstick faintly smudged on his collar, with excuses too hurried to be credible. Isabella noted it all, her silence more damning than any accusation. She no longer wept. She no longer begged heaven for answers. She simply watched, recorded, remembered. One night, James staggered into the bedroom, clearly intoxicated. He collapsed onto the bed beside her, muttering, "You've always been so good to me, Bella. Better than I deserve." Her heart ached at the sound of the nickname he hadn't used in years, but she did not respond. She only lay still, her eyes open in the darkness. Asterisk, better than you deserve. And you don't even know how true that is. Asterisk. Isabella began meeting quietly with her banker, her lawyer, and even a trusted jeweler. She reclaimed small fragments of herself in silence. Pieces of land her father had left her, investments James had ignored, accounts he did not know existed. Each step was a thread woven into a safety net, invisible to James. She no longer feared the day he might abandon her. She was preparing for the day she would abandon him. One evening, Isabella found herself in the library, her fingers brushing across the spines of books she had neglected in her years of sacrifice. She pulled down a volume of poetry her mother had loved and whispered aloud to the empty room. "Still I rise," she read softly. The words trembled in her throat, but they felt like fire on her tongue. Martha entered quietly. "What was that, ma'am?" "Nothing," Isabella said, closing the book gently. But in her heart, she knew it was not nothing. It was the beginning of something. James, oblivious, continued his charade. He left notes poorly hidden, receipts scattered, and excuses rehearsed. He still believed himself clever, still believed Isabella the dutiful, blind wife. But Isabella had transformed. Where once she had been fragile with heartbreak, she now stood strong with resolve. Where once she had sacrificed for his survival, she now prepared for her own. The storm was gathering, and she would be its center. Soon, the silence would end. The estate glittered that evening with the glow of chandeliers, laughter, and the clinking of crystal. James had insisted on hosting a dinner, inviting business associates, neighbors, and acquaintances who still clung to the illusion of his grandeur. Isabella, draped in a midnight blue gown, moved among the guests like a queen in exile, graceful, untouchable, watching everything yet revealing nothing. Her smile was polite, her laughter measured, but her eyes were sharp as blades. She caught James across the room, his charm on full display, his booming laugh echoing as he regaled their guests with tales of rebuilding his empire. His hand lingered too long on the back of Elena, the maid of honor, who had been conveniently invited as a family friend. The sight twisted Isabella's stomach, but she held her composure. Tonight was not the night to confront. Tonight was the night to observe. As the evening wore on, Isabella noticed the cracks forming in James's performance. His stories contradicted themselves. His laughter came too easily, too loudly. He drank more than he should, his glass never empty. And Elena, she was reckless, emboldened by the wine and by James's attention. At one point, Isabella watched as Elena leaned in to whisper something against James's ear. He smiled, too indulgently, too intimately. A guest glanced toward Isabella, as though expecting outrage, but she only sipped her wine and smiled faintly. Asterisk? Not yet. Let him think me blind. Asterisk. Later, when the guests had left and the house had grown quiet, Isabella found James in the study, loosening his tie, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You were magnificent tonight," he slurred, dropping into the leather chair. "Was I?" Isabella asked softly, closing the door behind her. He nodded, eyes half closed. "Beautiful, always beautiful." She studied him for a long moment. The man before her was not the one she had married. He was a shell, hollowed out by greed, pride, and betrayal. "James," she said gently, "do you ever think about the promises we made?" He blinked, confused. Promises? In the church, in front of God, before friends and family. For a moment, his expression softened, almost pained. But then he chuckled bitterly. "Promises are for the young. Reality is different." Her heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain still. "I see." He rose unsteadily, kissed her cheek as though dismissing the conversation, and staggered upstairs to bed. Isabella remained in the study, staring at the fire until it burned low. His words echoed in her mind. Promises are for the young. And she thought, then let us see what reality will give you when those promises no longer protect you. The next morning, Isabella decided to act more boldly. She arranged a meeting with a private investigator recommended by her lawyer in a quiet cafe. She handed him an envelope containing photographs, receipts, and names. "I need everything," she said firmly. "Proof that no one can deny." The man nodded, his eyes sharp. "Consider done." For the first time in months, Isabella felt a surge of control. Back at the estate, James was distracted, restless. He spent long hours on the phone, whispering into his study, his temper flaring with each failed negotiation. Isabella watched from the doorway one afternoon as he slammed the receiver down. his face flushed with rage. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently. "Of course," he snapped, then forced a smile. "Just business." She inclined her head. "I'm sure." He didn't notice the way her eyes lingered on the papers scattered across his desk, or the way her hand brushed the edge of one document before she turned away. A week later, the investigator returned with a file. Isabella opened it in her room, her hands steady though her pulse raced. Photographs of James and Elena entering hotels, dining in intimate corners of restaurants, even shopping together at boutiques where James had once taken Isabella. Receipts of gifts, signed in James's unmistakable hand. A record of calls, hundreds of them, at hours when James had claimed to be working. The evidence was overwhelming. Isabella closed the file slowly, her face unreadable. She had known, but seeing it laid bare in ink, an image broke something final within her. And yet, strangely, she felt lighter. The truth no longer hovered like a shadow. It was real, undeniable, and in her possession. That evening, Isabella set the table for dinner herself, a rare act that startled the staff. She lit the candles, polished the silver, and placed a single red rose in the center of the table. When James arrived, weary and irritable, she greeted him with a soft smile. "You've gone all out," he remarked, eyeing the arrangement suspiciously. "Just us tonight," she said smoothly. "I thought we could use the time." Throughout the meal, Isabella kept the conversation light, asking about his business, listening to his lies with serene patience. She did not challenge, did not accuse. But as she poured the wine, she looked directly into his eyes and whispered, "You should be careful, James. Sometimes promises do come back to haunt us." He froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "What do you mean?" She only smiled faintly, rising to collect the plates. "Nothing. Just a thought." His gaze lingered on her long after she left the room, unease settling into his bones. Later that night, Isabella stood before the mirror, removing her earrings slowly. Behind her, James entered the room, his expression strained. "Bella?" "Yes," she replied, her tone calm. He hesitated. "You've changed. You're quieter, colder." She met his reflection in the mirror, her eyes unblinking. "Perhaps I've simply grown wiser." He frowned, unsure of how to respond. Eventually, he muttered something about being tired and retreated to bed. Isabella remained before the mirror, her hand steady as she unclasped the necklace at her throat. Her reflection stared back at her, not broken, not lost, but transformed. The mask was cracking, but not hers, his, and soon the world would see what lay beneath. The night of the gala arrived with all the splendor James craved. The ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble, every corner echoing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of influential guests. James had insisted they attend, a showcase of his resilience, a chance to reassure investors and friends that Hayes' fortune was intact. Isabella had agreed without hesitation, her calm smile masking the storm within her. She wore a gown of silver silk that shimmered with every movement, her dark hair swept elegantly back, a diamond pendant gleaming at her throat. She looked every inch the devoted wife, though her heart burned with truths ready to ignite. And at James's side, as bold as ever, walked Elena. She wore a crimson dress, cut too low, her hand brushing James's arm with a familiarity no maid of honor should ever display. Whispers followed them through the crowd, curious glances thrown toward Isabella as though waiting for her to falter, to lash out, to collapse. But Isabella only smiled, serene as a queen upon her throne. The evening unfolded with speeches and toasts, James basking in the glow of admiration he had paid dearly to maintain. He stood at the podium, his voice booming as he spoke of rebuilding, of overcoming adversity, of honoring family and legacy. Applause thundered. Glasses lifted. Isabella lifted hers too, the crystal flute trembling only slightly in her hand. She caught Elena's smirk across the table. A silent taunt, a challenge. Soon, Isabella thought. Very soon. The dinner plates were cleared, the orchestra began to play, and couples drifted to the dance floor. James offered Isabella his hand, expecting her compliance. She rose gracefully, allowing him to lead her beneath the glittering lights. His grip was firm, too rehearsed, his smile too wide. "You're perfect tonight," he murmured. "And you," she replied evenly, "are about to learn the cost of imperfection." He frowned, confused, but the orchestra swelled, and their conversation dissolved into the rhythm of the waltz. When the music ended, Isabella excused herself from James and ascended the small dais near the orchestra. A microphone awaited, prepared for another round of speeches. The crowd fell silent, curious. "Good evening," Isabella began, her voice steady, resonant. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for celebrating alongside us." Applause rippled politely. James forced a smile, though unease shadowed his features. "But," Isabella continued, her gaze sweeping the room, "celebrations mean little when they are built on lies." A murmur rose. James's head snapped toward her, panic flickering across his face. "What are you doing?" he hissed, low enough for only her to hear. She ignored him. "For years I believed in promises," she said clearly. "Promises of loyalty, of partnership, of honesty. Promises I sacrificed everything to uphold. I sold my jewelry, my inheritance, my security, all to pay debts I did not create, all to protect the man I loved." The room stilled, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "And yet," Isabella went on, her voice tightening, "while I poured out everything, that man poured his affection elsewhere." Gasps echoed. All eyes turned toward Elena, whose face blanched, then flushed crimson. James lurched forward, his hand raised as though to silence Isabella, but she stepped aside, holding up a folder. "I have proof," she declared. "Photographs, receipts, letters. Proof of a husband's betrayal with the very woman who once stood beside me as a friend, my maid of honor." The silence shattered. Cries of shock, whispers of scandal. The click of cameras as journalists seized the moment. James staggered forward, his face pale. "Isabella, stop this madness." "This is no madness," Isabella cut in sharply, her eyes blazing. "This is truth, and I will no longer hide it." She tossed the photographs onto the table nearest the stage. They fanned across the linen, images of James and Elena in hotels and restaurants, in intimate embraces. Gasps turned to outright exclamations as guests leaned closer to see. Elena's hands trembled as she tried to gather the photos, but the damage was done. Murmurs turned to judgment, eyes narrowed, the whispers growing cruel. James turned to Isabella, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Please, not here. We can talk." "Talk." Isabella's voice rang through the hall, silencing him. "You had your chance to talk when you betrayed me. You had your chance when you chose deception over honesty. Tonight, the world sees you for who you are." She stepped down from the dais, her silver gown sweeping like a wave behind her. The crowd parted as she passed, some with pity, others with admiration. Elena reached for James's arm, but he shook her off violently, his composure crumbling. "You've ruined me," he hissed. "No, James," Isabella said softly, pausing at the edge of the ballroom. She turned once more, her gaze steady, unwavering. "You ruined yourself." And with that, she walked out, leaving gasps and whispers in her wake, leaving James Benjamin standing alone beneath the glittering chandeliers, his empire of lies collapsing around him. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp, cleansing. Isabella inhaled deeply, her heart pounding, her body trembling with adrenaline. But she felt no fear. No regret, only freedom. The next morning, sunlight streamed into Isabella's bedroom at her sister's townhouse, far from the echoes of the Grand Regent scandal. She had not returned to the estate. She had no intention of ever stepping foot in that house again. Her sister, Miriam, had insisted she stay as long as she needed. "You don't owe him another minute of your life," Miriam said firmly as she set a cup of tea by Isabella's bedside. Isabella smiled faintly, her body weary, but her spirit lighter than it had felt in years. "I know, and for the first time, I believe it." News of the gala had already spread across the city. Headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, disgrace. Business associates distanced themselves from James Benjamin. Investors pulled out. Creditors circled like vultures. The man who once walked with his head high now moved in shadows, his empire unraveling thread by thread. Isabella read none of the papers. She had no interest in spectacle. Her focus was forward, not back. A week later, James arrived uninvited at Miriam's home. He looked nothing like the man who once commanded rooms with his charm. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his shoulders sagging beneath invisible weight. "Isabella, please," he begged, as she stepped into the doorway, her arms crossed, her face composed. "I was wrong. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I can fix this. I just need you." She studied him quietly, the silence stretching until suffocated him. "Do you remember," she asked finally, her voice calm, "the night I sold my mother's pearls to pay the mortgage? You promised me it was the last time, that you would change." He swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. "And then the night I sold my grandmother's land? You promised again and again." "Bella?" No, her tone was firm, slicing through his plea. "You have broken every promise, James. Not just to me, but to yourself. I gave you everything. My love, my trust, my sacrifices. And you gave me lies." Tears burned his eyes. "I love you. It was a mistake. Elena," she meant nothing. Isabella shook her head slowly. "If she meant nothing, then what did I mean to you? Because from where I stand, it was I who meant nothing." He reached for her hand, desperate. She pulled back. "This is not love, James," she said softly. "Love builds. You destroyed." His knees buckled, and for a moment he looked as if he might collapse entirely. But Isabella felt no pity, only clarity. "This is goodbye," she said, her voice unwavering. "I hope you find what you're searching for, but you will not find it in me." And with that, she closed the door. The days that followed were not easy. Grief came in waves. Grief for the love she thought she had, for the years she had lost, for the woman she had once been. But with each sunrise, the grief grew lighter, replaced by something sturdier, something fiercer. She met with her lawyer, reclaiming what little remained of her inheritance. She applied for teaching positions at local universities. Her passion for literature and history reignited after years of suppression. She began writing again, journals filled with reflections, poetry, and plans for the future. Slowly she rebuilt, not an empire, not wealth, but a life of her own making. One evening, months later, Isabella stood at the window of her small but sunlit apartment. The city glowed beyond, alive and humming, full of possibilities. Her desk was cluttered with papers, drafts of her first manuscript, a memoir not of scandal, but of survival, a story for women like her, who had given too much and found the courage to take back their lives. Miriam entered, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, handing one to Isabella. Isabella smiled, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "To freedom." They clinked their glasses, the sound ringing clear and strong. That night, Isabella wrote in her journal, "Asterisk, I thought I had lost everything. But in truth, I gained the one thing that matters most, myself. I am no longer the woman who sold her treasures to save a man who could not be saved. I am the woman who walked away, who chose truth over lies, who chose life over fear. And that is wealth greater than any fortune, asterisk. She set down her pen, her heart steady, her spirit unbroken. Isabella Benjamin was free, and this time she would never sell herself short again.